I felt hopeless. I felt broken. I just felt like this was going to be my life.
Mm.
And my goal is to tell them, you are not broken. You are
Mm.
not hopeless. There is a way out. And if you're listening
Definitely.
to this and you're a veteran, there is a way out. There is hope and it's beautiful on the other side. And you're probably going to be better off after this than you were before you went in the army. What would Dr. Anthony Chaffee's prescription or recommendation be for somebody who feels like they're trapped in that situation?
I would definitely tell them that they're not trapped. This isn't a problem with them. They're not broken. Their brain's not broken. It's just. Welcome to the Plant Free MD podcast with Dr. Anthony Chaffee, where we discuss diet and nutrition and how this affects health and chronic disease, and show you how you can use this to optimize your health and happiness, both mentally and physically. Hello, everyone, and welcome to a very special episode of the Plant Free MD podcast. I'm your host, Dr. Anthony Chaffee, and today I have a very special guest, Mr. Chad Myers, who goes by Combat Carnivore, combat.carnivore on YouTube and Instagram, here to tell us his story. Chad, great to see you. Thanks for coming on.
Thank you so much for having me. And we were talking a little bit before. I went from being like one of your biggest fans to like hanging out with you
Mhm.
this weekend, this past 2 weekends ago, right, in Wyoming. And then you guys were so welcoming and then coming on the channel. So thank you so much for having me. It's awesome.
Yeah.
It's surreal.
Yeah, well, you're very welcome. It's a pleasure. It was great to see you in Wyoming. I was an unexpected surprise. It's always good to see everybody that shows up to these conventions and conferences and things like that, because it's just a nice, it's nice to see the talks. It's nice to learn from all the different sorts of speakers, but it's also a really good social event because you get to meet a lot of people there as well. So it was absolutely great to meet you there. So yeah. So thanks for coming out today.
Yeah, the testimonies blew me away. I was like,
Mm.
my eyes were watering. I was trying not to cry when I was listening to all these people just talk about. I don't know if you remember that elderly gentleman, right? He was like in his late 80s, and he was talking about how he's like crippled on the floor every single night and bad
Mm.
arthritis.
Yeah.
He's like, now I have a six pack, and
Yeah.
that guy, he like touched my soul. But it was just so
Yeah.
cool to see so much healing and so much power in the movement of carnivore in one place. So that was really awesome.
Yeah. That was really good. Hopefully next year will be even bigger. They're trying to do new things. They're rented out like a fairgrounds instead of just the university. And the rumor is they're going to try to get like a full rodeo going. So that'll be
Yeah.
pretty cool if they can do that.
That's cool. It was already cool for me because this
Mm.
is like my whole life now. Like I've
Yeah.
even considered like getting into farming just because I
Yeah.
see that the industry is like hurting and
Yeah.
like it's changed my time. I used to work cybersecurity. I thought that was going to be my whole life's career and I just like my whole life has changed because of carnivore. So
Yeah.
it's
Well,
interesting.
yeah, very well. To that end, can you tell us a bit about yourself and your story?
100%. Yes. I'm so excited to tell the story to people, not because, well, I am excited because I healed, but excited to speak to, I think there's so many disenfranchised men out there in the world. And we've learned that through like people like Jordan Peterson, speaking out. And as I've joined carnivore, as I became a carnivore and joined like this community, I start to realize the reason why it's not only a narrative going on, but like a poisoning of our society. So,
Mm.
um, let's back up kind of like when I was younger, I was completely healthy, like in terms of I was like mentally healthy, physically healthy, athlete, could do whatever I wanted. I remember when I was like 17, I think I was 16 or 17, I worked salmon fishing in Alaska, like getting on these tiny little planes and figuring shit out. And then I went to Hawaii one-way ticket when I was 19, and I was just kind of like this free spirit. And then I joined the military and something happened to me in the military. It's a long story. It's to say it's an unorthodox way. I almost died,
Mm.
and I went into anaphylactic shock, and then they had to hit me with an EpiPen, and I ended up being okay. And I was like, "Whoa, that was a close call." But something happened to me after that where I started to slowly spiral downhill. And I started to get all these problems, and some of the worst problems were like this panic attack, this panic disorder that just wouldn't go away. And I got to the point where I was having these panic attacks frequently throughout the day where it was like debilitating, where I felt like I couldn't move. It felt like I wanted to die. And it kind of stemmed from this phobia that my throat was going to close up, like when I almost died while I was in the army. So it was like a weird PTSD thing. And that led to this anxiety that the next panic attack was going to happen. And then it became so crippling that I started having panic attacks while I was driving, and I almost got into accidents while I was driving. I felt like I was going to pass out. And so then I stopped driving. And then I was this grown ass man, like having to get rides to work. And then it got even worse to where I didn't even want to be alone, like being alone, because I had this irrational fear that my throat was going to close up and no one was going to be able to like save me, or I was going to hit my head on something, or I don't know. It's just completely irrational. And that led to all sorts of other problems, phobias, and it just kept getting worse and worse and worse. I went from being like this young adult that could do anything he wanted at any time to having this brush with death to just being like mentally crippled. And then in addition to that, the brain fog was so debilitating that I used to beg and actually pray for an hour of mercy, like an hour of mental clarity. Please just give me an hour of functioning like a normal human being. And that kind of was like when it started to get more suicidal. Like
Mm,
I wasn't actively like putting a gun to my head, but I was like, I wonder if I like stepped out in front of this car. Like different
mhm,
creative ways of dying where my family would still get my life support or my life insurance rather. And on top of all of that, I was going through horrible physical symptoms. Like I was a jiu-jitsu athlete and I would get overheated and panic while I was trying to work out doing anything. So I stopped working out and stopped doing jiu-jitsu. Uh, I would get about 4 to 5 times a week, like acute flu-like symptoms, where it felt like somebody injected me with the flu, and I was like throwing up, massive migraine, couldn't function, digestive issues, everything that you can think of from the head to the toes. It felt like just horrible pain, and it was weird because like once I would either throw it up or it would come out the other end, then it was like the symptoms relieved themselves within like 20 minutes. It
mhm,
was so weird. And I went from doctor to doctor to specialist, and I know you don't like them, but I went to a chiropractor and I went to a chiropractor just desperation. And they're like, yeah, we specialize in this kind of stuff. And he put me on this weird meal plan with like that was cost thousands of dollars. And I didn't
wow.
have that kind of money, back then. So anyway, like it was just nonstop. And that happened for about 10 years. And what was cool is during that time, I started to recognize that my diet was affecting all this, where before the doctors will tell you you were crazy. And I would go to these doctors, I'm like, I'm pretty sure it's like my diet. And they were like, no, it's probably psychosomatic. Go to the specialist. And, I was in my early 20s, mid 20s with scopes going in and out of me, I mean, probably 2 times, I want to say, in my 20s, trying to figure out what was wrong with me. And they kept saying, like, you look healthy. But they said I had like inflammation, but overall, they're like, you should be a clean bill of health. And
Mhm.
then I started seeing that my diet started triggering my panic attacks. I started I was going to school for math and physics at the time. And so I was trying to approach it scientifically. I was like, okay, I'm going to limit my diet to, unfortunately, it was like rice and broccoli. And then I started experimenting with all these diets and started researching diets. And that's when I started getting into this kind of like research realm of diet related to nutrition and mental health. Because 10 years ago, that wasn't anywhere, at least it wasn't online, like and just a normal guy typing, how to heal myself anxiety naturally. And everyone was trying to give me drugs and they were giving me drugs. I was trying to figure out how to get out of that more naturally, without chemicals being added to my brain that I knew was already messed up. And I was balancing having 4 kids, being in the military, government contracting, the whole 9 yards. And I started to get a little bit better once I cut out all my processed foods. And then so I'm like, okay, like there's some hope here. And it took a few years to eventually come across a video of Paul Saladino getting his ass chewed by some ladies from the doctor show. And I was like, he's kind of making sense. And it was the first time I ever heard the idea of an ancestral appropriate diet because all you hear about is like fruits and vegetables and white rice and lean chicken, And so I started learning about that, and I remember from there I heard this other guy talking about fasting, and I tried fasting. I remember in my first 3-day fast, it was about day two. So I get like emotional. My brain fog was gone, and I was like in tears. Like, is this really happening? Is this the answer?
Mhm.
Out of all the drugs and all the specialists and wanting to die and like really just not eating. And then after a couple times fasting, I saw a video with and I wasn't out of the woods yet because every time I ate, it still got bad. But I was on the right track. And then I saw a video with you and Dr. Paul Saladino, and it was sounded extreme, but everything you were saying, doctor, was so like profound for me, but so like that makes perfect sense.
Mm.
I don't know why I haven't stumbled across this before. And I started following all of your recommendations, and it was hard at first, like the first 2 weeks were hell, but like I kept going through it. And now I became a brand new bill of health. I went from not even being able to be alone. I traveled down to Brazil to earn my black belt in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and I own my own school now.
Nice.
And I learned a new language, Portuguese, and eu falo português agora, and
Nice.
yeah, and in the heart of Rio de Janeiro, like going to like the dangerous favelas, competing and testing for my black belt, came back, by myself, and like I said, I own my own school. I compete here, and competing as a carnivore has been something else, but it's like given me my life back. It's given me my marriage back because that was a huge strain on my family. It's given me my mental clarity back. And like every once in a while, like I remember I had some cheese not so long ago and the brain fog came back instantly. And I was like, God,
Mm.
I'm so glad I don't deal with this anymore. And my wife started it, and now she's doing great because she was struggling with manic depressive bipolar disorder,
Wow.
and she was dealing with a bunch of things. So like we were both like mentally screwed up, trying to raise our kids, trying to like make the marriage happen, and we are both just extreme burdens on ourselves. And you being introduced to you and like going down the route of carnivore completely just learning more and more and more saved my life and saved like I would say like my marriage in a sense to the fact that how we were really strained for a long time and I didn't know how much longer I could exist. I didn't know how much longer my marriage could exist. I was holding on. And we made it out the other side and now like we are so happy. It's weird. Like my wife and I she's like my best friend. I don't want to do anything without her.
Mm.
I feel like a gaping hole when I'm not with her. And so that I know this is, and that's actually like the short version of the story. However, this is the thing is I got really mad. I got really mad once I started to realize I've been lied to. And I started to realize how many veterans are in this same situation scenario. And then I started looking up the statistics, which are completely unacceptable, that 22 vets a day commit suicide. A statistic done in 2021 showed that over 30,000 veterans have committed suicide, while simultaneously only 7,057, I believe is the number. I apologize if that number's wrong, had died on the line of duty. So we are 4 times more likely to die by our own hand joining the United States military than we are to die from an enemy of the United States.
Yeah.
And I was like, so there are so many men and women who served on the line of duty who are feel the way I did. And I know exactly, I shouldn't say exactly, but I know what they're going for through. I know the feeling of being trapped and not knowing how to ask for help. And when you do ask for help, the only intervention method is you are loved, the world is better with you in it. Here's an SSRI. And that's
Mm.
like all they know how to do. And that's so disheartening when the message that you're giving in my story, you know what I mean, is we can find a way out without drugs, without a bunch of medicines and magical cures. And so yeah, and so that's pretty much my story is I started to get angry, and I believe, and this is why I love talking to you. I believe I know what happened to me. I believe I started to I researched it so much as I could, uh, what was going on in my brain, what was going on with my hippocampus and my amygdala, and how, its relationship to junk food and processed food, and the upregulation, is that the word you would say, for BDNF and
Mhm.
stem cell being released and human growth hormone being released that we never get access to. And so then I started researching the military diet, and it pretty much says in the MRE, it says there's no fresh food in here. This is processed food, and you can live on this for up to 21 days in a row. And it shows the studies that I watched this one interview. A study shows being on junk food slash processed food for 1 week has detrimental effects on somebody's hippocampus, and therefore depression and mental state. So there I am. That's me in a nutshell. I call myself the combat carnivore because I do combat sports like Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I'm a veteran. Um, I'm a carnivore, and I believe we can heal the world with steak strangles and stoicism. And I think that we can heal veterans with steak strangles and stoicism, putting them in a place. I know jujitsu has helped so many veterans already. And I think simulating combat is a great way to start transferring those memories from the hippocampus to the prefrontal cortex in a safe environment, back to that hierarchy with camaraderie and community. So I think jujitsu's like one of the three pillars that people need to rebuild themselves if they're suffering from PTSD. And now I want to ask you uh, more about what you think happens in that scenario and if my theories are correct. So thank you for listening.
Yeah, no, thank you so much for that. I should say that I don't dislike chiropractors. I have a lot of friends that are chiropractors. There's a lot of rugby guys that play that go into chiropractic is like Life College gives scholarships and things like that for
Right.
rugby. Um, the one thing is though is that some chiropractors sort of put in as like a business model that like it sort of sounds like that guy did. It was just trying to churn something out. It's just trying to sell you
Yes.
something, upsell you, give you this big diet that costs thousands of dollars that people can't afford. That I don't like, and I've seen that be part of some of the teaching that goes into chiropractics is that I mean, you are a small business owner when you have a medical practice or a chiropractic office, or, as a doctor or a dentist or whatever. So learning some business acumen is not a bad idea, but um, the ones that I've seen, they try to upsell things is like, how do you get return customers? How do you get these things going? How do you convince people just basically come back 3 days a week for the rest of their life? Um, you're supposed to be helping people and getting them so they don't need you. I mean, that's the whole idea. That's the whole treating them forever. That's like the Goldman Sachs standard. Is it really a good business model to cure people from disease? No, we want to treat the symptoms so that we perpetuate, so we have a customer for life. And so some chiropractors I've seen sort of go that other way, where they're just trying to they're just using people's illnesses as a you know a profit model, and that's what I don't like. And But some I've seen that do really well, a lot of like physical therapy stuff, helping rehabbing injuries and things like that. I don't think that you can cure um, major diseases by adjusting the spine, just my opinion. But, I think that they're all helpful ways, but I just don't like the sort of the unscrupulous business practice that some of them get into. So just all my chiropractic friends out there, just don't get hurt by that.
Yeah.
Um, but I think it's really important. What you pointed out there was that the treatment modality we had is that it's like, hey, you're loved, you're important in this world. Those are all good things, and here's an SSRI. Depression, it doesn't come from an SSRI deficiency,
Hmm.
and diabetes isn't a metformin deficiency. These are things that just can paper over some of the symptoms, but it's not fixing the problem. It's not getting the underlying issue, and that's so important to point out and to have. clinicians understand that as well, but also just people. If you're looking for a solution in your life, it's a pill can help, and some people do get help by that significantly. And I know people that have said that, those sorts of medications. I mean, I've even heard people say that, they were very suicidal and that Prozac saved their life and that they probably would have killed themselves if Prozac hadn't come out when it did. So that's great. Um, but it's not addressing the underlying root cause. It's just helping with the symptoms. Hey guys, just want to take a second to thank our sponsor, the Carnivore Bar. I don't promote many products because honestly, all you need to be healthy is to just eat meat. For those times that you're out hiking, road tripping, or stuck at work and you want a nutritious snack that is just meat, fat, and salt if you want it, the Carnivore Bar is a great option. So I like this product not because it's just pure meat, but also because I want the carnivore market to thrive as well. And the more we support meat-only products, the more meat-only products there will be available in the mainstream. So if this sounds like something you'd like to get behind, check it out using my discount code Anthony to get 10% off, which also applies to subscriptions, giving you 25% off total. All right, thanks guys. And
May I
that's it.
ask a question about that?
Of course.
Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt,
No, you're
but
fine.
as far as my research went to look at this, and this is one of the major questions I wanted to ask you, it said that what was it, 40 to 60% of the people who take an SSRI see any effects from it,
Mhm.
and upwards of 30 to 50%, only 30 to 45% or 50%, I can't remember, but as low as 30% feel remission or actually see remission of symptoms who take SSRIs, and that there is enough of a percentage that it turns people more suicidal
Mm.
or increases their depression, that they actually have to put the labels on both the adults and the children's antidepressant bottles. So I was like, is this really, out of the last
Mm.
23 years for veterans, this is the best intervention method that they've come up with? Are the numbers I'm saying, do you resonate with those numbers, or was I reading an incorrect study?
No, I think that's probably right. I'm not in psychiatry, so I don't know all the specific numbers. I would have thought it was probably a bit worse than that, actually. In psychiatry in general, mental health in general, for the whole gamut of different mental health issues, it's usually about 10% get like full remission with standard of care. So that's really
That's
not good. And then you get like another 40% that gets partial improvement, and then like 50% that just get treatment resistant, sort of forms. And so, obviously there's going to be some variability within all the different sorts of things. And, schizoaffective disorder is going to have different sort of outcomes than major depression. But no,
Mhm.
it's not good. It's not good at all. And so, I mean, and that's clearly showing you that that's not the underlying cause. The underlying cause isn't that you have a serotonin imbalance and you need to rebalance it with these medications that allow higher serotonin sort of effect, or all these other sorts of things. So it's not, we think this chemical imbalance in the brain. Well, maybe, but why is it there in the first place? Answer that. Well, it's genetic. Well, no, because they weren't born with it. They developed it over time. And so, and even with genetic issues, when you have these concordance studies with identical twins and they have the exact same genes, and one twin has a disease, it's called penetrance. Sometimes they only have, 40 or 50 or 60% of the time their other twin would get that disease as well. So they have the same genetics, and yet only sometimes will they get the same diseases with those same genetics. So it's important to realize that it's a you can have genetic predispositions and then environmental triggers. And if you don't get the environmental trigger, it doesn't matter if you have the genes. If you need both, and if you get the environmental trigger and you don't have the gene, then you doesn't matter either. So you have to have both for a lot of these things. Um, and so it's not being caused by just the lack of this pill, because these rates of mental health issues and depression and schizophrenia and all these sorts of things are going up. They're going up and up and up, especially since the 80s and 90s. They've gone up significantly since then. And that's
Yeah,
exactly when we
there's
changed our diet.
Yeah, that I was gonna tell you about that because you talk about this a lot, and you and I have a generational gap, right? Like, um, so my mom, for example, my mom's an immigrant from Panama,
Mhm.
right? She moved here, and my grandma, when she moved here with my mom, and my mom was younger, she had always cooked her own food, had the organs and the innards and stuff like that, and everything she ate was like grown from her own vegetable garden. And I think I find that very interesting because my mom didn't cook for me at all, really. She was
Mm.
not about cooking. It was like what happened in the 80s and 90s where it was like were women working too much, where it was like, and this is general, I know, so but it was more about convenience. It was like that generational gap, like right when that hit, where it's like, well, fast food is really easy as we're running around different sports, trying to be a mom and be you know, a boss and so on and so forth. Do you think that there is like that's why it started happening to us 80s and 90s kids? Like the right there is when that cultural shift happened as well, where women went from cooking everything and being very connected with
Mhm.
like nutrients and I don't know, being part of the food making process to the convenient side of things.
I think definitely it has a big part to play that. A lot of things happen sort of at the same time. They were vilifying meat, they were vilifying fat, and they sort of said, "Hey, fat makes you fat. Fat gives you heart disease, all that sort of stuff." So we just started dropping fat, started dropping animal fat, I should say, and reducing red meat. And then what do you replace that with? You replace it with plants. If meat's bad for you, you have to replace it with other things, and especially red meat, fatty meat. So we started eating a lot more chicken, but like lean chicken breast with the skin off.
Mm.
And we ate more fruits and vegetables, ate more cereals in particular. And that's a funny thing. I found a paper from the 1930s talking about how you fatten up pigs for lard. That was a big commodity back then, was lard. And they found the best way to fatten them up and make them grow fatter and fatter and fatter and make more lard was if they gave them grains, and that would cause them to overeat. The carbs are raising insulin, screwing around with your leptin and hunger signals, and dropping your blood sugar. So you need to go back and eat again. But then mixing that with skim milk, which was a byproduct of the fat and the butter and cream industry, and so it was like a throwaway product. No one drank skim milk back then, so they gave it to pigs, and they found that that made them fatten up even more because in this paper it said specifically it causes them to overeat, and the combination of the grains and the milk, skim milk, caused them to overeat even more than one of them on their own.
You
Grains,
just described my diet growing up.
breakfast cereal. That's what grains and milk are. Yeah,
Yeah,
exactly.
and lean chicken if I ever ate meat. Like,
That's it. So, we've been fattening hogs with skim milk and grains for centuries, fattening them for slaughter, and we wonder why the obesity rate is what it is when we have like the president or the CEO, whoever from Kellogg's cereals going on the news recently saying, well, as times get tough and food prices go up, you can eat cereal for dinner. It's you don't need it. It doesn't have to just be for breakfast. Just have cornflakes for dinner and lunch, and you can eat it at any time. A family dinner with bowls of cereal, like just get out of here. And that's what we've been doing to fatten up hogs for centuries.
mm,
And no, fat makes you fat. That's what it is. Well, I'm sorry, it's not. And but yeah, so during that time, we vilified meat, we vilified fat, we started eating all this other garbage, increased the amount of grains we're eating, increased the amount of seed oils, but tripled the amount of seed oils we were getting by calories. And also sugar and high fructose corn syrup starts massively going up because everything tasted like garbage. You take out the meat and the fat from it. And at the same time, the food industry started making these ready-made meals, and like the packaged dinners and hungry man dinners and TV dinners and all these sorts of things. And they marketed them very cleverly because they could buy it in bulk. They could make these ready-made meals that you could microwave. The microwave came out and all that sort of
hmm
stuff. And they they could make these ready-made dinners um, cheaper than what you could buy the ingredients and make it for yourself from scratch and spend, 3 hours making this whole big dinner and and spend more money and all this time. So this saved people money and it saved them time. So it was this huge thing. So a lot of women were just like, and just families in general, like, oh my goodness, yes, absolutely. So it all became these ready-made meals. So people knew how to cook, but then like, you know, your generation, my generation, all of a sudden they stopped, because your mom would have learned how to cook from her mom. She would have seen her do
Hmm.
that. But then that was right when they started having these packaged ready-made meals. They were cheaper than the ingredients were, than the raw ingredients were. And so it was 3 hours of your day back and it was less expensive. So this was just a no-brainer for a lot of people. My mom just enjoys cooking. So she always enjoyed cooking. And so she just cooked anyway. She cooked every meal and dinner that we had pretty much. We almost never ordered out. We almost never went to restaurants. We never Uber Eats or any of that garbage. We just ate home cooked meals all the time. And so we all learned how to cook. And so we all cook now. And but then you had an entire generation of people, like your mom, who said, well, this is so much easier and cheaper. We'll do this instead. And then people like yourselves and a whole generation grew up that never learned how to cook. They never learned how to cook from their mom. And now they're dependent on those ready-made meals because they have no idea how to cook, right? And so now
Yeah.
you got them. And so now all the prices went up. So now it's not cheaper to buy the ready-made meals than it is to buy all the ingredients. It's way cheaper just to buy the ingredients. So it was a long game that they were playing. And so
Yeah.
they destroyed the human capital. Human capital is very valuable. It makes and generates money. And so if you destroy that human capital, all of a sudden, you're less self-sufficient, you're more reliant on other people. So if you can just, repair your car, fix your house, you're just a homesteader and you're just doing everything on your own, you are not valuable to anybody. Any of these industries, they don't make money off of you, right? Because you're self-sufficient. So if they make you more dependent and more ignorant and more or less able to care for yourself, well, then you have to pay other people to do the work for you. And so that's sort of the idea. And they're trying to infantilize, more and more people these days. Oh, don't worry about that. Oh, we'll take care of you. Oh, and it's sort of nice. It's comforting, like, oh, someone's going to take care of me. That's nice. Um, but it's keeping you trapped. It's keeping you enslaved. That's the new slavery, is keeping you a slave to these organizations and governments that have taken over your personal responsibility so that you can't live your own life. And now you don't know how to live your life. So yeah.
Speaking of which, like SSRIs, right? They It's not addictive due to the semantics of the word, but it is you like you
Dependency.
makes you
Yeah.
dependent and
Yeah.
you like getting off SSRIs is horrible.
Yeah.
So not only do they break you, then they make you dependent and then they give you a drug that's like a repeat customer. And I
Mhm.
was looking at the pharmaceutical companies and how much they lobby. It's like 1,000 over 1,600 employees, people being employed to lobby. Like, think about how big a corporation would be with 1,600 employees.
Yeah.
That's just their lobbying
Mm.
like department. That's insane. And right behind
That's
them are
nuts.
insurance companies, food companies. It all makes sense that
Hmm.
they make the laws. It makes sense that they're the only ones allowed to write prescriptions. It makes sense that 20 years have gone by, and this is still the best intervention method for the people who gave up their life and security for our country.
Hmm.
It's insane to me. And so I wanted to ask you then, how does this happen with the brain? So for what I looked up, because you talked to me about the mitochondria, I really want you to talk about that.
Hmm.
But before, like, can we go like macroscopic and talk about, okay, when you're in places or in situations of prolonged stress, it causes your amygdala, right, to send stress signals to the hypothalamus, which releases your fight or flight chemicals. And therefore, a signal gets sent to your hippocampus to remember what caused that for the future. And the more prolonged stress you go through without at the same time being able to replenish the nutrients or the energy or however you want to look at that with things like BDNF, what happens is your amygdala becomes swollen and your hippocampus becomes like, uh, I
Atrophied.
guess, like atrophy. There's a word that's yeah. Look at the brain doctor,
Mhm.
knowing exactly. But yeah, and so what I see here is it's so it one is that the process is that what we're kind of looking at?
Um, it almost certainly that's going to be, a major factor. It's hard to say exactly what causes all of these things. Because you can go look on a more macroscopic level, look at the areas of the brain like the hippocampus, and when we see atrophy in the hippocampus, this is strongly related to things like depression, but also memory and other sorts of issues. And BDNF specifically stimulates the hippocampus as well. So very important for that. This is why exercise is actually good for your memory, is because it upregulates BDNF. Getting out in the sun, getting UV light in your eyes, on your retina, stimulates BDNF as well. Proper food and nutrition do as well. So all those things definitely, and looking at things from a macroscopic level, you can certainly see those changes. But then what's going on the microscopic level, like you mentioned, mitochondria. Mitochondria, run the cells. They're called organelles, so they're just the organs in the cell. And so they're running around doing things. So the mitochondria are they're called the powerhouses of the cell because they generate ATP, which is the cellular currency of the body. But they don't just sit there pumping out ATP. They physically move in the internal cytoskeleton of the cell and move up and down and go to this surface area and give energy to this little machine on the surface that shoots out a whole bunch of neurotransmitters, or sends a signal down a neuron, or tells it to do its job in some other way. So the mitochondria are the ones running around doing things. And when they start breaking down and slowing down and not having enough of them, then those processes start to go by the wayside. And when you're talking about neurons and your neurons not firing properly, then you're talking about your brain not working properly. And so you're going to get dysfunction. I don't think that, thinking about, when you think about sort of depression, I think it's more that your brain and your body is telling you, it's just like there's something wrong. There's something wrong with this. There's like this isn't working properly. There's some harm being done, and that's being manifested as like depression, and then schizophrenia is a much more profound version of that, where you're actually hearing and seeing things that aren't there because you can't interpret reality because your neurons aren't registering the information coming in properly, which is pretty wild. And so a big part of that has to do with the internal functions of the cell. So mitochondria. So if the mitochondria are broken and destroyed and they can't carry about these processes properly, you're going to get dysfunction in your brain. Going on ketogenic diets has been shown to increase the amount of mitochondria you have, and the increase the efficacy of those mitochondria, because they turn over and recycle old damaged mitochondria just by having low insulin. If you have low insulin chronically, low as in normal, then you're constantly turning over these mitochondria, you're constantly turning over these older cells called autophagy. But you don't have to fast, you don't have to starve yourself for that. That's a normal housekeeping process. Is just you will be turning over these cells and these organelles normally. It's when your blood sugar goes up and your insulin goes up that insulin blocks autophagy. If insulin goes up too high, you can't access your fat stores. If insulin goes up too high, you can't turn over your old cells and your old mitochondria because it stops those actions. So, like I said, insulin is a very important molecule. I stress this in sort of all of my talks. It's extremely important, extremely busy. And so when you get your insulin down to normal levels with a ketogenic diet, like a carnivore diet, and you're not pulling in all these other toxins that screw things up, you can go through autophagy, you can replace and recycle and upregulate your mitochondria as well. But then also you're getting the benefits of a carnivore diet on top of a ketogenic diet is there are all sorts of neurotoxic chemicals that affect your brain and your brain chemistry that now you're getting rid of. And I've seen so many people improve on a ketogenic diet, but some of them really have to go to a full carnivore diet, meat and water only, before they really see full resolution of their
Yeah.
symptoms.
I would say I was that person because
Mm,
every single step I made me better significantly. And it's hard to admit this, and I never admitted this even to my wife, but I was the closest thing I could relate to it was like schizophrenic.
mm,
Like there'd be certain times where I would hear like either like just horrible music or like
mm.
muffled talking or it's just weird things. And that is completely gone. Thank goodness. And I was like, I was scared to tell somebody because like they're gonna put me in a psych house and
Yeah.
I don't know all the things, but I used to freak out because of that. Completely gone now. And so yeah, I that kind of makes sense with everything you're saying. Uh my question when you were talking about that is you said there's like toxins that go in the brain. I think I've heard you say that the brain becomes insulin resistant, right? And
Mhm.
then ketones are the only thing that can cross the blood-brain barrier. Uh in terms of getting nutrients to the brain, it is can you kind of like explain that relationship between because I try to explain that uh dementia, Alzheimer's, they are calling like type 3 diabetes in like kind of a informal sense, right? But could this PTSD, because and this is why I'm asking this question. I believe that humans are badass. I believe that the
Mhm.
human species was the most alpha, badass, awesome people on the planet, and they're meant to handle traumas. I've like watched, these shows where like other animals like go through a life-threatening scenario and they're like half bleeding and then like they
Mm.
just move on to grazing again. And it's like uh humans had to have been the same way. There's
Yeah.
no way that like one bad thing happens and then we go out. Everything was trying to kill us. Like the environment was trying to kill us. The sun was trying to kill us. The water was trying to, like everything. And those are our ancestors, our genetics. Just getting a meal, just reproducing, just learning something new was life threatening. And would probably cause our generation complete trauma just living one day as one of our ancestors. There's no way that the trauma we're dealing with puts us out for the rest of our life. One of the statistics I was going to say earlier is that out of the 8,000 veterans that commit suicide a year, 5,000 of them, over 5,000 of them, are at the ages 50 years or older, which is the
Mm,
opposite trend that we see from World War I and World War II vets who had a peak of PTSD and suicidality, and then they got better over time. We're
mm.
seeing the exact opposite, which tells me that it's chronic. And so, could it be that like this PTSD and this chronic stress is like and we talked about this a little bit at the wedding, since the brain is only like 7% of your brain of your body composition in terms of mass, right? But takes up over 20% of the body's energy requirements. And so like when you're stressed in those states, could you like overclock your brain and could PTSD and this chronic stress be the fact that you have like almost like early onset like dementia because you overworked your brain and you're being fed over there nothing but garbage food. In addition, the military diet is tobacco, nowadays the what's it called? The vaping, um, and what energy drinks, right? Those are like
Mm.
the three staples in the military. And they're really like vending machines with energy drinks while at the same time someone's suffering mentally. So could this all be related? And that's kind of my question to you. And that's kind of like what I think happened to me. It's like something happens to you where it over stresses you and you simply don't have the nutrients. Like you're either insulin resistant or yeah, I'll let you dive in on that.
No, I think you're totally right. I mean, I think about like the savagery of World War One. It was the first time we had large scale mechanized warfare. We didn't have like all these conventions and rules. Like you could just do anything. They were going around and going into the trenches with flamethrowers, just torching people alive, and mustard gas and all these other sorts of things. They had bayonets. They didn't just have knives on them. They had a triangular sort of prism sort of shaped knife on it so that you'd stab them. So if you didn't kill them, it would leave a really big, weird, gaping hole that would heal really strangely and would leave them, crippled and chronically injured and in pain the rest of their life. That's illegal now. It's against the Geneva Convention. That you could do that then. So you could. You know, you had like tanks going through for the first time with flamethrowers, just doing horrific things to people. And you got, J.R.R. Tolkien and C.S. Lewis, professors at Oxford after that. They fought in World War One. They were in the Battle of the Somme, and in fact, they had a lot of, well, I used to call it shell shock, but they had, that negatively affected such a large amount of people. They called it the lost generation, people who fought in that. And then you had, the World War II generation as well. Like you said, there's just a different relationship between that PTSD, that shock of just seeing the savagery of war and all these horrible things, and then coming back and trying to, reintroduce yourself into just the normal society. Um, they got better. It was hard to deal with, but then they got through it, and now it's just sort of getting worse and worse and worse. Like you said, it's a chronic issue. It's a progressive chronic issue, where it's like you've had this trauma, you've had this problem, and instead of being able to recover from it and get better, it's just getting worse and worse and worse until you're like, no, I can't deal with this anymore. I have to go. So something's different, isn't it? And so I think it's definitely, something. I think that it follows the same pattern of increased prevalence and severity that we're seeing in all the other mental health issues, which are only going up and getting worse. And I think that it's absolutely to do with not necessarily just insulin resistance, but with just eating processed junk food and just eating the wrong sort of food that's screwing up our brain. Insulin resistance, sure, because if you have insulin resistance and you have chronically elevated insulin, you are going to suppress your body's normal mechanics for cleaning up your cells and your mitochondria. You just are. And so if you have insulin resistance of the brain, you're not going to get energy properly into the brain. That's a big one. And long before you get Alzheimer's, because Alzheimer's, you're getting this atrophying of the brain too. You can actually see this on MRI. And technically, you can't really diagnose this until you see it on autopsy or you take a biopsy or something like that. But those sorts of tangles that they've associated with or said were causative of Alzheimer's. That study actually has been shown to be fraudulent. There's so much bullshit in medicine and academia. And just in the last couple of years, they found that the people that made that paper, that said that Alzheimer's was caused by these protein tangles in the neurons, that they basically doctored their evidence and their study to make it look like that, so that they could publish a profound study and make their names and get tenure if they didn't have it already. And so it's fraud. But you get this shrinkage of the brain. You can see that on MRI. You get this atrophying of the brain. And so that's an end stage insulin deficiency or insulin resistance sort of things. So
Hmm.
long before that, long before you've damaged the brain and you know uh, kept it from its required sort of nutrients and energy for long enough that it starts to atrophy and shrink, you're going to get dysfunction. And you're going to, the actual functionality of the brain is not going to be able to work. Well, it's not going to be able to work properly because you're not getting enough energy to the brain. You're also not going to get enough fats and nutrients to the brain. Your brain is made out of fat and cholesterol. It's supposed to run on ketones, and it's made up of fat and cholesterol too. So if you're not getting all this fat, you're taking a bunch of medications that destroy your cholesterol metabolism. That's not going to be good for your nervous system. There are endless studies that in the peer-reviewed literature discussing how vital cholesterol metabolism in the brain is. The brain makes cholesterol. It's so important for the brain to have it because your brain's made out of cholesterol, that it makes its own cholesterol, and that if you disrupt the normal cholesterol metabolism of the brain, this causes very serious neurological dysfunction.
Hmm.
And yet we're doing everything we can to cause metabolic dysfunction of our cholesterol metabolism. So, I mean, it's going to be multifactorial, but I've seen more and more evidence of things like PTSD responding to ketogenic diets in general. And in particular, the studies on ketogenic diets by and large, the most successful ones that show the best results are ones that are actually ketogenic, because something you say is low carb, and there's like, yeah, they eat, under 150 carbs a day. And it's just like, that's not low carb. Sorry. That's certainly not ketogenic. And, and, uh, and then, so the lower the amount of carbs, under 20, under 10, 0, they get successively better and more successful. And the ones that specify, eating animal fats and meat, those are the ones that do best. I mean, there are some animal studies that show that, like, oh, well, there's some ketogenic diet, shortened telomeres or something like that. That was a rat study that came out recently. And like, oh, well, they're definitely in ketosis. We checked their ketones, and the fat we used was Crisco. Okay, so fine. So you gave them engine lubricant, and you're blaming the ketogenic diet on this. I mean, like, I'm sorry, I have some thoughts. So the studies that show the best outcomes are actually ketogenic and eat fatty meat. So being in ketosis is really important. Getting the ketones in the brain, ketones can reconstitute into fatty acids, rebuild the structures of the brain. 2/3 of your brain, including the cortex, is optimally and preferentially runs on ketones. So you have enough ketones and you have enough glucose, your brain will only run on the ketones. Unless you start dropping the ketones, then you start filling up the gaps on glucose. So both
Real
those
quick,
things. Yeah,
when you say cortex, do you mean neocortex, like the outer layer of the
yeah,
brain?
yeah,
Okay, sounds good.
yeah. So the
Sorry,
most outward part, yeah. So
okay.
the major outer lobes that we use to think and
Make us human, right? It's like our separation for to make us human.
yeah, give us our rational thought, things like, or sometimes
Okay, sounds
irrational
good.
thought. Yeah, yeah.
Okay,
So
sorry. I just had to make sure because okay, sorry.
yeah, yeah.
Carry on. Sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just
No,
wanted to
go.
know what that cortex was. Yeah.
Yeah. The neocortex. Yeah, the outer layer, the 2/3 of the outer portion of the brain,
Okay.
is optimally runs and preferentially runs on ketones. And but not only that, you need these essential nutrients. You need DHA and EPA. You don't just need omega 3s. That's the thing that bugs the hell out of me, is that people say, well, you need omega 3s, so get some flaxseed. No, you don't need just generic omega 3s for your brain. You need specific omega 3s. You need DHA and EPA. That's like saying, well, you just need liquids. Liquids, any liquids are fine, because you need water, and water is a liquid. Therefore, you just need liquids. Okay, so vodka and gasoline are fine then. That's what you need. Just anything liquid is fine. Of course not. You need specific liquids. You need specific omega 3s. You need DHA, you need EPA for your brain. 20% of your brain is DHA. And so if you're not getting this from your diet, and we don't really make it very well ourselves, you're going to have a deficiency. And so your brain's not going to work properly. You don't have enough, fat soluble vitamins that come with the animal fats that exclusively exist in animal fats, like D3 and K2. You're not going to be able to function properly. Getting up B12. B12 only exists dietarily in meat. And so, and especially red meat. And you require B12 to myelinate your axons and your nerves. And so when you don't have enough B12, that myelination starts to fray and break down. You get demyelination, and so you get nerve damage. And there's a study out of Oxford in 2008 that showed that people under a certain level of B12, it was like around 330 picomoles per liter, and down after 5 years, they did annual MRI studies, and they found that their brain shrank by 5% volume. And the thing is that that level of B12 is like halfway to 2/3 up the normal reference range. So a good half to 2/3 of that so-called normal reference range is a clear deficiency, where people are getting neurological dysfunction, damage, and brain shrinkage. But because so many people are deficient in B12, the reference range is being renormed to match that average, because these reference ranges are not optimal. So your doctor look at this and goes, oh, well, it's in our range. Well, your range is wrong. Your range is an average. You're treating that as an optimal range. That's what they treat it. As long as it's in our range, oh, that's what we got to do. So you're saying that's optimal. That's the best you can do. And if you go above that, it's too high. You go below that, it's too low. So you want to be in that range. And so they're treating that as an optimal range, but that's not even what it's advertised as. It's advertised as an average range. And the average person is fat, sick, and malnourished. And the average person has critically low B12. This is why a lot of vegetarians and vegans, they say, well, my B12 is fine. I bet you it isn't, because you're just going into that whole average, that because everybody's deficient. And so
Mhm.
when you have low B12, you're going to get neurological dysfunction as well. So everybody that comes into my office, um, that is on a whatever diet, unless they've been on carnivore and they're coming to see me to help optimize their carnivore diet, they're just on a whatever diet. Even if they're on like really, oh, I try to eat really healthy, blah blah blah, they're all deficient in B12. All of them are sort of in that range of, below 400 picomoles per liter in US numbers, picograms per milliliter. They'd be sort of below 500. um, they're in that sort of dangerous, critical level that it's like, this is bad, this is causing harm. And so eating actual meat, ketogenic meat-based diet, these are the diets and the studies that show the best outcomes for mental health, for diabetes, for cancer, for all these other sorts of things. It's really, really important, especially for mental health, that you get, enough, or you get in ketosis, so you're getting ketones, but you're also getting the proper nutrients for your brain, and then you're eliminating out these neurotoxic chemicals that can come in plants and processed foods. One of the things you mentioned, that junk food just making, people dumber and things like that. There was a study recently in rats, and they put them in sort of this, like a big tank of water, and there's just this one little platform there, and it all looks the same. It's
Oh
like this
yeah.
sort of this milky substance and a white platform. So it all sort of blends in. So it's very subtle to see. They put normal healthy rats just getting their normal sort of chow or whatever, which probably isn't all that great for them anyway. Um, they can get on the post in a few seconds. They know where to go. Then they give the rats the equivalent of, like, just junk food, processed food, with all like the seed oils and processed carbs and things like that, and sugars, right? And it takes them 5, 6 times as long to get on. And they're just swimming around. They're swimming around. They just can't find this little post. They can't get out of there. They don't know what's going on. It's caused brain damage. And this is only after, a week or two eating processed foods. It's caused brain damage. And I don't know if that's intentional. If people out there are trying to screw with people's brains for some sort of nefarious purpose to, make them easier to control and manipulate. If you're sick and you're miserable and you're just trying to struggle to maintain, you're not looking at high level moves. Like
Yeah.
you're just trying to survive. You're just going to work and coming home and feeling miserable and just trying to live your life and have some sort of happiness at some point, and you're struggling. You can't look up here at what these assholes are doing, and how they're manipulating politics and economies and all these sorts of things, because you're like, I can barely function in my own life. I can't, I have
Yeah.
no processing power available to worry about that. So I don't know if that's intentional, but
You
certainly
talk
that's what they
about
say.
that, right? Like bread and circus, right? In
Bread and
Rome.
circuses.
And
Yeah.
and I mean that's talked a lot about in like the Mockingjay series, right?
Mm,
The what do they call that? The Hunger Games, if you
yeah.
ever read that. It's like that to a T, but we're becoming that. But bread and circus, it's like take away the meat, give us bread and
Yeah.
entertain us. And I think we are a nation that is strung out. Like our dopamine and our
Yeah.
other neurotransmit or our other hormones that relate to dopamine, we're just like constantly strung out with information and people don't like to talk about, but like porn and
Mm,
information and food. It's crazy. Like the three hardest things that were to come by for our ancestors was to eat, to learn, and to reproduce. And now we can get all three in the first 5 minutes
mhm.
of our day. And I wanted to ask you, what would your suggestion be to veterans who are coming back from combat and they feel like they're trapped with PTSD and I what not only with diet but like lifestyle like getting out in the sun like you talked about like circadian rhythm what the microplastics are doing in the water what fluoride is doing in the water like what kind of I know what I've done but I want to hear what would your advice be to veterans because the thing is, I felt hopeless. I felt broken. I just felt like this was going to be my life.
Mm.
And my goal is to tell them, you are not broken. You are
Mm.
not hopeless. There is a way out. And if you're listening
Definitely.
to this and you're a veteran, the guy, there is a way out. There is hope and it's beautiful on the other side. And you're probably going to be better off after this than you were before you went in the army. And you talk about predispositions. They did a study in people who had uh what's it called? Decreased size, decreased volume of their hippocampus were like 30 times more likely to develop long-term PTSD. And like, um, so the thing is, what would Dr. Anthony Chaffee's like prescription or recommendation be for somebody who feels like they're trapped in that situation?
Well, I would definitely tell them that they're not trapped. This isn't a problem with them. They're not broken. Their brain's not broken. It's just they're being exposed to things. They're screwing with their body and their brain. That's going to happen to anybody. And when you put somebody in a very high stress situation, seeing and potentially having to be involved in pretty horrific things, and you're stressing them out and putting these horrible chemicals in their body, something's got to give. And so it's not them, they're not broken, it's just their environment. They need to change their environment. And so even if you can't go full carnivore, just get rid of the junk food, get rid of the processed food, get rid of the seed oils, the sugars, and the processed carbs. Eat whole food, eat meat, eat animal fat. Your brain's made out of animal fat. You need those nutrients. They're not just calories. It's an essential nutrient. They're essential fatty acids that you have to have, especially for your brain, or you get sick and die. They're essential fat soluble nutrients that you have to have, or you get sick and die. And so these are vitally important nutrient sources that you need for your body and your brain, especially if you can cut out carbs, go ketogenic. You will see your brain and your attitude and mental health improve dramatically if you cut out these carbs and start eating a lot more fatty meat. And if you can go all the way carnivore, I would definitely do that. Dr. Georgia Ede, who's a Harvard trained psychiatrist and was a professor at Harvard for a while, she wrote a book called Change Your Diet, Change Your Mind. She goes through the stepwise progressions. Just cut out the junk food. Okay, now try to limit carbs. Okay, if you can get rid of all your carbs, even better. And then if you're still struggling and it's still not everything that you need, go carnivore. She has a whole chapter on just the carnivore diet and how this can be the best method to improving mental health, including PTSD. And then, like you say, there's other sorts of things. Sleep is so important. I mean, sleep is everything. That's how our body and our brain repairs itself, and that's when our neurons start turning off and recycling and cleaning up all this damage that has happened throughout the course of the day. Every minute we're awake, we get low-grade brain damage, and when we're sleeping, that's when we repair that. So it's vitally important to prioritize sleep. Get out in the sun. Like I said, if you get sunlight in your eyes, you are going to trigger BDNF, brain-derived neurotropic factor, which will stimulate the hippocampus and other parts of the brain to grow and build new connections and stronger connections in throughout the brain. Of course, that's going to help you. Exercise, it's going to do the same thing. You're going to increase BDNF. It's also going to improve your hormones. It's going to upregulate growth hormone, which helps keep your tissues young and under repair. In women, it will optimize their hormones, and men will optimize your hormones. High intensity exercise, sprinting, lifting weights. Those are the ones that are the
Jiu-jitsu.
best. Exactly. So high intensity. Yeah. Well, but
Sorry.
that high intensity sort of work,
Yeah.
right? Because I fought pancreation since I was a kid. It's a high intensity. You are busting your ass. You are working, even if you're doing kickboxing or boxing or whatever, and you just wailing on the bag and just training. You just go maximal exertion as hard as you can for as long as you can. Take a break, do it again. All those things are great, and it's also fun. And it gets your body moving. It gives you something to do and get your mind off of and away from all of these negative things as well. It probably gets you into a social group. You can actually start having different sorts of friends outside of your normal friend group, and that can be really helpful and cathartic as well for these sorts of things. Being in the sun, physically in the sun, those UV light that penetrates your body. If you ever took a flashlight in a dark room and put it on your hand, it glows right through. That light comes right through. Light penetrates actually quite deeply, especially sunlight is very penetrative. So the UVA in particular can penetrate quite deep. The infrared can penetrate, and that actually stimulates the mitochondria in your cells throughout your tissue. So being in the sun is beneficial for your mitochondria as well. So all of these things have a big role. The biggest role is going to be all the chemicals you stuff in your face every single day. And so that's your food. And so if you're putting in a lot of chemicals that are harmful to your body, because we're not combustion engines, we're not a steam locomotive, we don't burn the food that we get in, we're not burning coal for energy. So it doesn't matter what the calories are. Calories are meaningless into this discussion. We are chemical factories that interact with chemicals. So we're bringing in food that are a mixed bag of chemicals, and those chemicals will get absorbed and interact in our body in various ways. And so if you're putting the right chemicals in, you're going to get the right reactions. You're putting the wrong chemicals in, you're going to get the wrong reactions. And you're going to be harmed by that. So that's the vast majority of problems today, just comes from that simple thing. But there's more too. Like you said, getting in the sun, getting out in the sun in the mornings, getting your circadian rhythm set, exercising in a particular way, and drinking clean water, all these sorts of things with a filter on it, because yeah, they put all sorts of nasty stuff.
Yeah.
Fluoride,
Do you have an opinion on fluoride and microplastics?
microplastics. Yeah, so a lot of microplastics have been found actually in brain tissue and in
Ugh.
testicles. Every single example of like in these studies, they took testicle samples, every single testicle sampled out of this study on dogs. Dogs, they all had microplastics in their balls, and then in the brain. Um, Actually, I just saw a study on this the other day. I can't remember the exact amount, but in the brain tissue, they were finding like a significant amount of microplastics, like a few, like I think it was like a few grams of
Mm.
plastics like in the brain, right? So this is getting wild. Again, these are chemicals that have never existed in nature. We've invented these things, and now we're putting them in everything, and they're getting into our bodies. And these chemicals are going to have chemical interactions. Our bodies don't know what the hell to do with these things, and so we don't know what the outcomes are going to be. We found that they can be very disruptive to our hormones as well. They can cause a lot of hormonal dysregulation, a lot of estrogenic effects. But the reality is we really don't know the full impact of these things, because we just have no idea, because they're brand new novel chemicals, and they're making new plastics all the time, because they get, like the different BPA. Oh, it's BPA free. It's just like, oh, okay, well, it's BPD and BPZ and BPG, because they change it just slightly. And so now it's not that one product that you're worried about, but it's nearly identical and has the same effects, sometimes worse. And so it's all a con. And so don't use plastics, use natural materials, use glass or ceramic, or metals as well. People have a problem with aluminum. I don't know about aluminum cans, but there's sometimes aluminum cans have plastic linings, which you definitely don't
Mm.
want. All these other sorts of things. So there's a lot of issues and a lot of exposures that we have to be careful about. The makeup industry, there are so many hormonally disruptive products, essential oils, and then the makeup that women use, and the creams. And I mean, you just look on the back of a bottle of moisturizer. 50 ingredients, none of them are in English. It's just all just weird chemical name.
Yeah.
None of that should be going on your skin. The only thing that should go on your
I
skin,
just learned about
tallow.
that.
Yeah.
Yeah, like I just learned about that. You never want to put anything on your skin that you want to eat.
Yeah. Yeah. As you
And
absorb it.
that tripped me out. That like how absorbent our skin was tripped
Oh,
me
yeah.
out. It scared me. Now, that actually brings me to my one of my last things is this is kind of like vindication for me. I'm forgetting the name right now. It's killing me that I'm forgetting the name. But what's the process of your body going into like releasing digestive acids and enzymes before food even enters your body? Do you know that phrase? I can't, the something phase, but it's like 20% of your stomach acid and other processes start before food even enters your
Yeah.
body just by smelling it, seeing it, anticipating it. And so I
Yeah.
have been kind of on this thing about reconnecting with your food. We're so disconnected from our food. Like when we eat, whenever we touch food, it's usually processed food. And
Mm,
if it isn't processed food, we usually have like a fork and knife. And so we're even distant from our food from like being scared to like touch it.
mm,
And I think, what would you say about the importance of like touching your food? Like, for example, maybe not using a fork and knife and being more like our ancestors and like grabbing your food and that contributing to the digestive process because digestion and the entire process of it is actually like a fairly fragile process. I learned. I was taking the nutrition course at Peterson Academy.
mm.
Um, and
Interesting.
he was getting into this about the circadian rhythm and digestion's role in that, and how digestion starts before, like 20% of it starts before you even put food in your
Hmm.
mouth. And so I was wondering, reconnecting with your food, that like it makes sense that almost every single thing that humans used to do was about their food. They would study their food, they would track their food, they knew their food's favorite food. They
Mm,
knew like by looking at the ground and the grass, like which way their prey probably went, to the point where they gutted it, they cleaned it, they preserved it, they butchered it, and then they touched their food for every single process through. And I wonder how important that plays a role into our digestion and separating ourselves from our food, from the fact that we don't like butcher it, the fact that we hardly cook it anymore, the fact that we don't even touch our food or know hardly anything about animals, and starting to demonize animals to say they're like killing the planet. You know, I mean, with greenhouse gases.
mm.
I was going to see if you had an opinion on reconnecting with your food, because I don't think we have a healthy relationship, or almost any relationship that our ancestors like anything that would sort of resemble what our ancestors had with their food.
Yeah, I think that that probably does play a big role, that preprandial phase where you sort of anticipatory sort of, phase where you're smelling the food, you're getting ready, your mouth starts watering, you start thinking about these things, your mouth waters. That's what you're describing. Your body start making these digestive enzymes and producing acid and things like that because you're anticipating some food. So you probably do lose a lot from that. When you're stalking your animal, you're stalking your prey, you're hunting it, you're much more in tune with it, and then you take it down, and then you're cutting it up. Probably does have a lot to do with that. Even just the act of cooking, it probably does a lot of that. You're smelling these, the smells of cooking. You're sort of getting a bit more, it's hard to not pick at the food that you're eating, and sort of snack on it like as you're cooking, like as a cook, you just sort of want to do it because you're just so excited to sort of eat it. So I think that sort of anticipation is lost when we're just sort of getting a bag and putting it in the microwave and then bringing it out. You don't have
Hmm.
that sort of anticipatory
It's
phase.
like your body's not, it's like your body's not primed. You know, like
No.
before it was like it's getting prepared, and now it's just getting food and food it doesn't like into its
Yeah.
body without like any preparation. And now it's playing catch up.
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know, I just wondered if you like had looked into that, if that, I think that
Yeah.
greatly can negatively impact our digestive processes.
Yeah, well, I haven't looked into it specifically, but it does it makes sense to me just thinking about it, as having that early anticipation and and just thinking about it. Because the thing is that every time, because I do cook all my meals, and I've always prepared all these sorts of things. And so I'm always um involved in making my food. I'm taking it out, I'm cutting it up, I'm not butchering the entire animal, but I buy in bulk, and so I'll cut up a whole big slab of meat and I'll put the steaks on it, and I'll take those out in my hand, and I'm not afraid to grab raw meat or raw chicken. It's not icky, it's just fine. And
Yeah. I think
I
it's
mean,
like satisfying almost,
yeah.
like a satisfying feeling to touch the food, you know?
Yeah, and you just sort of get over it, I mean, at first,
Yeah.
because we're just told, they're like, "Oh, there's germs. Oh my goodness. Oh, you're gonna get some freaking germs. You're fine. Just wash your hands, if anything." But if if I'm like driving, I have just brought steak with me in the car, and maybe I'll cut it up into chunks and use a fork. But sometimes I'll just make a T-bone and I'll just have that on a plate and I'll just hold it by the bone. And I'm just eating that like a
Mhm.
like a meat lollipop, as I'm
Yeah.
driving. I'm going like a road trip or something. That was I just had car steaks. and
Yep.
that's what I had. Um, I haven't looked into whether how much that affects it, especially like the touching, the physical sort of thing. But I wouldn't I would absolutely think that just the act of cooking and having those smells and looking at it and anticipating it is definitely going to do that, because I've certainly noticed that in myself, to the point that when I get home and I'm anticipating this so much and I want it so bad, like I can't even wait for the pan to heat up. I just started eating the steak raw
Yeah.
because I'm like, I need to eat this, you know? Hey everyone, really happy to announce a new sponsor for the show and for everybody down in Australia, Stockman Steaks, who are delivering high quality grass-fed and finished pasture-raised beef and other meats, flash frozen and vacuum sealed to your door, something that I've been enjoying a lot of myself recently as well. They also have a great range of specialty items such as high-fat keto mince and carnivore beef and organs mince with liver, kidneys, and beef heart as well. So use code Chaffee today for a free order of beef mince or another specialty gift along with your order at stockmansteaks.com.au, and I'll see you over there. Thanks, guys. And
Well, yeah. Like when you read a book, they talk about how like reading an actual physical book is a lot better than an ebook because you're
mhm,
seeing the progression, like
yeah,
as you go through, you're feeling it, you're experiencing it. And so like that's why I was kind of asking, like, do you
yeah,
think it goes back all the way to hunting? Because it's like, oh, I didn't get the catch, so I'm not going to eat later, but I did get
mm,
it. So it's like, oh, like your body knows
yeah,
every single process on the way through. So it knows when
yeah,
to prepare that. It's like it's so intertwined and entangled with like your life is so entangled with the food that you eat that
mm,
it's kind of like matching in every step in a harmonious way. And but this leads me to my last question is grass-fed versus grain-fed. I've heard you talk about it a lot, but I just want to kind of throw in a caveat because you kind of say like in the Olympics, it's like grain-fed beef is like second place. It's still better than everything else, right? And well,
grain
I
finished. Yeah.
accident oh sorry, yeah, grain finished. So I actually accidentally ran into this experiment where we're kind of like in the middle of a move, and I'm shopping at a new store now rather than driving all the way across town for my butcher shop, and they are grass-fed, grain finished. But I was only buying grass-fed, and I didn't even realize I was doing it. I was just getting
Mm,
the stuff that looked the best. And uh for the last 3 days, I have my energy level is just like through the roof.
mm,
Like I already felt incredible on carnivore, like my life was saved, and now I feel like even more of like a superhuman, like the
mm-hmm,
amount of um I guess like energy and willingness and just like I know excitedness to be alive at every
mm,
step is just been incredible. And then I'm thinking, what am I doing differently? Because I'm like, I'm still getting outside, I'm still getting in the sun, I'm still grounding. And then I realized, like, oh, I'm getting like different meat. And I realized all the meat I've been buying is grass fed. And so I don't, that was weird to me because to me it wasn't that big of a deal. But I'm kind of like in a bias now that I think grass fed might be extremely important and maybe
mm.
like a missing thing. What do you have? Like I know you've talked about a lot, but would you mind like kind of putting your 2 cents on that?
Yeah, I've never felt better in my entire life than when I had a 10-year-old grass only cow. It had only eaten grass its entire life. It was 10 years old, had a lot of time to lay down a lot of nutrients and build up a lot of nutrition and health. And I felt supercharged on this stuff. It was like I literally, it was just like it was next level. I know exactly what you mean. Like I felt like a superhero on carnivore, and then I had this stuff, and it was just like, you know, I was I was Superman instead of Spider-Man. It was just like, oh my
Right.
God, it's just like next level superhero. And so, no, there's definitely a difference. I mean, there's objectively a difference. You have different um, constellation of fatty acids and relationship and amounts of DHA, EPA, and omega-6 arachidonic acid. But also the micronutrients. There are regeneratively raised, grass-fed, and finished farms that have published their results, and they're compared to USDA is 4 or 5 times the number of micronutrients. So there's an objective difference. How much of an effect does that have on overall health long term and getting diseases or whatever? We don't know. We don't have any studies on that. Um, for just general health, people do pretty well. For the studies that we have, which are limited because they're not just on carnivores, they're on people eating a mixed diet with, organic, grass fed, and or just grain finished. They don't see much of a difference in health outcomes, for whatever health outcomes they were looking at for however long they were looking at. Obviously, all those studies are
Mm.
going to be limited in to large degrees, but there is an objective difference. And I certainly felt a subjective difference. I felt a lot better when I ate that. The thing is, though, is that not everybody can do that. It was a lot cheaper to get that cow. It's cheaper to buy an older cow. It's a cull cow. They were going to just sell that as hamburger, and I wanted it as steak, so they were able to get more for it, and I got for it less too because they split the difference. They're like, hey, look, I normally don't make as much, so I'll charge you less than I would normally charge for a young steer, but more than I would normally get, and it's a win-win for both of us. Great.
How would you find that? Like if I were in the United States, how would I go about finding some that scenario?
So you can go to a butcher and they'll sort of do the legwork for you, but they'll charge you double. So whatever it is, if it's like, $3 a pound from the farmer, from the rancher, they'll charge you 6, 7 bucks a pound just for, doing the extra legwork. And that's usually all, yeah, and it depends, beef prices have gone way up, so it's probably more now. Um, but when I was looking at it 4 or 5 years ago, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, that was about what it was. But there are websites. I can't remember the name of it because it's been so many years. But there are websites you can sort of Google around, try to find it, where you can find people that do grass-fed only livestock and grass-fed milk and pasture-raised eggs and things like that. And and so there's a whole website that has that, and you just put in your zip code and it'll show you all the different ranchers that do that. It's just all grass fed. And so I just called them. I just called like 3 or 4 of them and just said, hey, I'm looking for the oldest animal that you have. Just
Like my
grass
wife.
fed its whole life. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And, and, uh, and that's what I'm looking for. I want to look at in the stakes and what would be your price? And so I just called around. There were a few different people and they quoted me different prices. And then one said, yeah, I mean, we're actually going to cull a 10-year-old cow from the herd in a couple months. And, you could have that one. And I was like, great, let's do it. I ended up getting for $1.75 a pound. It was grass
Mm.
fed its entire life. It's never eaten anything except grass. And it was amazing. It was absolutely amazing. One of the things you got to
You
do
talked about the fat, right? Like the fat was
that
yellow in
it's
it,
like,
you're
yeah, it's
saying.
like dark yellow. Our fat's dark yellow. That's supposed to be yellow. Fat's supposed to be yellow. So a lot of the nutrients in there give it a yellow tinge. And so when you're finishing it on grains and dead hay, it sort of lightens it up because there's not as many nutrients. And so it what was I going to say? Oh yeah,
I'm so
that's
sorry.
it.
I
No, it's all
I
right.
interrupt.
That's okay. Most people can't necessarily do that, but if you can do the upfront cost of expenditure of just buying that, because it's going to cost a few $1,000s to buy a whole cow. So maybe you go into it with your friends and or family, and you each get like a quarter or something like that. It's much cheaper to do it that way, and you're getting it for much less per pound, but you get the whole animal. So you're going to get a lot of hamburger, you're going to get a lot of roasts and things like that, and that's not going to all be steaks, so you have to learn how to cook and learn how to cook these different cuts. But also when you do that, especially with grass-fed animals, because they don't have the marbling that other grain-fed animals do, but they do have subcutaneous fat and they do have visceral fat as well, and obviously they have the organs and the fat around the organs. You need to tell them not to trim any fat off. You just
Hmm.
tell them keep all the fat that you can. Anything that gets trimmed off and any of the intra-abdominal fat, put that um in the ground beef.
Ground beef, right? Yeah.
Yeah, so you get
And
really fatty ground beef. Yeah.
did you only live on that cow for like a certain period of time? Like you didn't eat anything else but that cow for
Yep.
like a range of time?
Yeah, I got that just before I moved down to Australia, and then left the rest of it with my folks. And so yeah, that's all I ate for months and months and
And
months. It was amazing.
how'd you feel? Yeah, yeah. Tell me a little bit about how you
Yeah.
felt. Like,
No, it's just amazing. I just had
yeah.
tons of energy. Normally, when I would eat like a big steak, I just be a bit lethargic and just want to chill out. This
Uh-huh.
was like gave me superpowers. I was just bouncing off the walls. I had energy for the rest of the day. I felt great. And so, yeah, it was a big difference. It was a very big difference in how I felt. And
Can you do that in Australia?
you can, yeah. And so now I get meat from uh, grass-fed, finished, pasture raised sort of stuff. The people that sponsor me, Stockman Steaks, they do all
Right.
grass-fed and finished pasture raised sort of stuff. And so I order all from them. So and it's great. It's absolutely amazing. The 10-year-old cow that's just been eating grass its whole life, it has a different smell to it too. You can just smell the different nutrients and things like that. Other steaks just sort of smell a bit, when they're raw, they don't have much of an odor to them. This did. It had this fresh smell. It was just like just invigorating. It had this just made your eyes wide, and you're like, oh my God, that just smells amazing. And
Is that, do you
yeah.
think evolutionarily? Because like, do you think that's probably the animals we hunted?
Mm.
It's like the young bucks were harder, so we would like target the older, bigger one.
Those
And
we're unlike other predators where a lot of predators, most predators go for the young or the
yeah.
elderly or the sick or someone that's falling behind. We were able to see by the shape and the size who the alpha was, who the biggest ones
Oh,
were, and those were going to be the healthiest because they got the best access to food. They
oh.
were the healthiest and the strongest, and so we're like, well, that's the best one. So we were actually taking out the best. And so, but yeah, that smell. I mean, you're smelling the nutrients and you're smelling, the different things that can be beneficial to you. And so, if it has more of that odor, like, ooh, there's something good there. I think that speaks to the amount of nutrients. Chad, unfortunately, I have a
Yeah,
meeting
totally.
starting, and unfortunately, I got to run. I'd love to keep talking to you, but unfortunately, ran out of time. So great to talk to you, man. Really good. I'm so glad to hear that you've done so much better and changed your life and gotten your life back as well. And now you're out helping other people and spreading the message and helping other veterans and combat veterans, especially because that is so important. Like you said, it's an absolute uh, just travesty that so many people are finding that their lives are so hard and hopeless that they have to take their own lives, especially when they've sacrificed so much for the rest of us. So thank you for all that. Where can people find you and see more of your work?
And I'll send the link to you, so hopefully it'll be in this video, in the description. But combat.carnivore is my Instagram, my YouTube, my Linktree.
Mhm.
I try to make it the same all the way around. And like I said, I'm trying to help as many veterans as possible with stake strangles and stoicism. I have the most comprehensive online jujitsu intro course ever for people who watch Joe Rogan and Jocko Willink, and they're like want to get started with jujitsu, but they feel like a barrier. I literally take people from inside their car to like inside the gym to feel comfortable. So I'm trying to bridge that gap. I'm trying to talk to people about carnivore. I'm trying to give them a practical life philosophy that helps guide them through the dark times, like if stoicism. So that's who I am. And thank you, Dr.
Yes.
Chaffee, for doing exactly what you do. You're saving lives. I know you saved my life, and it was a pleasure to be on the show.
Oh, well, thank you, man. I really appreciate that. And I do hope it's helping anyone. I'm really glad that it helped you. So, Chad, thank you so much for coming on. I'll put all those links down in the description and people can find you there. People, please do go and check out Chad and see more of his work 'cause he's doing great stuff. Thank you, man. Really good to see you.
Thank you.
And yeah, thank you,
Have
man.
a good one. I
Thanks, you
appreciate it.
too. Hey guys, thank you very much for taking the time out to listen to what I had to say. If you like it, then please like and subscribe to my YouTube channel and podcast. And if you're on YouTube, then please hit that little bell and subscribe, and that'll let you know anytime I have a new video out, which should be every week, if not more. And if you could share this with your friends, that would help me get the word out and let me know that you like what I'm doing. Thanks again, guys.